Hey there. I didn't realize how many people walked in behind us. Great to see everyone. Jen has been in the Spatial Information Design Lab this year. Spatial Information Design Lab has been around since about 2004, and it's a multidisciplinary research lab within the architecture school at Columbia University. And we've been doing a lot of interviewing lately. And this person worked in Dan Taeyang Lee, who wouldn't send us a picture of himself, and he's going to be working with us this summer. But at the very end of the interview, he asked us, so what's your position? Both Jen and I are very opinionated people, but particularly me. And I sort of rehearsed what I usually say about the lab, that the lab is situated in an architecture school and it makes networks across the university and within the department, that data is not neutral, that we are ethical and responsible in our use of data, and most often the lab is described as making invisible things visible. All these things over here, which are really at the basis of a lot of the projects if you go to the lab website and look at what we do. But what happened was Jen thought about it for a couple of weeks. She didn't give any of these answers that I was telling to Dan about how great we were. But
yeah, and also when I was thinking about how to frame this talk, that question had stuck in my mind because nobody had asked me that before, like, what is your position? And when I think about position, this came into my mind kind of at 5 a.m. in the morning one morning. And position, I think so many of us have seen this. It's the classical processing particle sketch. It also makes me think of Dan Schiffman. And so a particle always has a position. And people always have a position, right? You have a position, and you and I.
Well, yeah. But following from what we normally, the sort of script that we give of what the lab does, that data is not neutral. Nowadays we're working on data that is really dynamic, and so it really changes the position statement of the lab, saying that a particle is something very specific and brings its own environment to any software that it inhabits. And we're going to elaborate on that later.
Yeah. And what's nice about the idea of a particle is that it doesn't just have a position, right? It also has velocity and acceleration. So you're not just who you are, and the project isn't just what it is. It's also which direction it's going and how it might be changing directions. And then beyond that, we also have interactions, right? So a particle has interactions. What particle system does it belong to? And how is it engaging with other particles? And so I sort of ended up thinking that instead of asking what is your position, a more useful question, especially the way that with the data that we've been working with, is to think about what kind of particle are you, or what kind of particle is the data that you're working with. So where are you starting, right? What is your position? But also where are you heading? How fast? What are the influences on the data and yourself? And what particle systems do you belong to? I like to put literature in when I give a talk, and thinking about particles is something that I've been thinking about for a while, specifically in the sense of being able to show things at scale. So I really like this Italo Calvino quote about ginkgo leaves falling, and trying to distinguish the sensation of each single ginkgo leaf from all the others, and to maintain the individual distinct nature of each particle is how I think of it, while also showing the larger, all the leaves falling from the trees. And Bruno Latour has a related, very related idea, but his is that as we move away from the individual, we end up losing information. So as we aggregate, we get a different kind of information, and if we could, it would be nice to have all the information that each individual has, each data point has, in the aggregate, which we can't quite do. But
okay, so we're going to talk about 4 projects today, and really they're the beginnings of projects that we're working on. You're not going to see them in their completed phase, maybe next year. But the work has all been funded by Thomson Reuters, and the idea is to foster collaboration across massively diverse disciplines at the university who use data at the central piece of their research. So we're working on 4 projects right now, which are, a little messy in their current incarnation. The first is about ships, and it's the ways in which commodities are moving across the ocean. So we all know that commodities and people move much slower than information around the world. But there's really a lot of invisible pathways to open up as things move around the world. And so we're looking at the movement of oil and other kinds of energy around the world. And that's a collaboration actually with Thomson Reuters themselves. The second project is working with the library at Columbia, really as a knowledge network. And that's not just one library, it's all the libraries at Columbia. And we have access to their complete catalog and to snapshots of their use, daily use of various library. And what we're trying to do is think about the different ways in which knowledge can be organized rather than the traditional way of, the Library of Congress telling you how to organize things without necessarily going to the Amazon model. Because actually at the university, there are all kinds of rules about anonymity of, Jen will go into that a little bit later, but we don't want to break, we don't want to break with that that's going on there. The third project, we're collaborating with the journalism school. And also Dennis Tennant in the English department is working with us, and he does a lot of natural language processing. And there's also 2 people in the library who are really spearheading this effort, because it actually took us about 5 months to get the data out of the library. They were very unwilling to do this kind of research, even though the library is such a digital space within the bureaucracy of the university. The third project, we're collaborating with the journalism school and Mark Hansen, who's newly appointed at Columbia. And he has been and it's a project also in collaboration with Penn Global Voices, who protect, international authors with regard to vulnerabilities and censorship across the world. And so we've started a project about Weibo, it's also, again, at the very beginnings, and we'll show you some of that. And the fourth project, which is the very exciting beginning of a collaboration with the newly established Mind and Brain Institute. I don't know, I think it was Zach Lieberman who talked about big new buildings being built on universities. This is one of them, but we think kind of optimistically about it because it really has a radical approach to multidisciplinarity and is going to be in the forefront of a lot of brain sciences. So we were trying to take things like neural networks very seriously rather than as metaphors, and we're going to show you some of that work. So, a lot of our data is still looking like this, and we're at Eyeo, so we don't want to expose you to any of our statistical crunching. And so
what we're doing here is a little bit precarious. It's a little bit vulnerable. We're in the sort of messy middle of what we're working on. And we're going to end up having an exhibition in December in New York. So the end will be then. This is the middle.
Okay. So I think I just really went over these 4 things. So that's what. So this is, that's the library, Weibo.
Stuff about the library.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to give you a little bit of introduction to the history of the lab, and also to say that I've just published a book which has a lot of work that people might not know about, but ended up in the establishment of the lab that I started. The first project, which was called Eyeo Museu, was in Barcelona, and I happened to be, I claim it here in front of you all, that I was the first artist who used GPS as the technology became spun off by the military and for civilian use at the same time. That was the very first project I did. I also followed the history of declassification of satellite imagery, and although Google Earth to most people in this audience is such a naturalized way of viewing the Earth and zooming in and zooming out, most people don't know that just 10 years ago, high-resolution satellite imagery was actually classified. The technology itself was classified, and I did a lot of projects which really aimed to track that, and every time something became available to civilian with corona images or Landsat or SPOT or whatever it is, I tracked that and did various installations. And museums at that point were the ones who were funding my work. The last project in the book is $1 million blocks. So you can see embedded in this work is sort of pixels, points, and then in $1 million blocks using GIS, so it was GPS, remote sensing, and GIS. Block by block, we looked at incarceration rather than crime across many cities across the US. This has become sort of the poster project of the lab, and we've been involved in this project for about 10 years. The bright red spots show the highest incarceration, in this case in Brooklyn, New York. These are the lines that connect the home address of incarcerated people to where they're housed upstate New York. When you zoom in on a specific community district, we started quantifying the cost of these, of the basically people being moved in and out of the city over a 3-year period because there's so much recidivism. And these kinds of neighborhoods are usually the poorest and neighborhoods of color across the United States. And the United States has the highest incarceration in the world. We've done all kinds of policy work and related to that issue in community settings and also with the Department of Probation in New York City. Another project which really gets at the kind of political, ethical use of data has to do with this project about remittances, which was also part of a huge collaborative project that we did with Delors, Scafidio, and Renfro, Ben Rubin in the other room, and Mark Hansen, where we showed a mapping project in a 360-degree panorama. But in this case, this was about the migrants who move from a specific country to the United States. So, for example, you can see how many people from Mexico move to the United States and how much money they send back to their home country while they're migrant laborers. And it's very, very small amounts of money, and it's really quantifying a massive informal global economy, which we then, this is how it was displayed in this round format, in the panorama. This is using, for this audience, using processing and OpenGL. And Bobby Pietrusco and Stuart Smith had a lot to do with the visualization. Okay, so those two projects are showed at the last Eyeo in a lot of detail. So now, going back to, as we were talking about, the particle and the system, with Ziga, who has currently just opened a show at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, we've gone further with this project to look at it, so this is different visualization now using D3, where you can click on the various places, but more importantly, you can zoom in on local places and tell stories about these transnational lives, really. So these are a group of people who live actually in Koreatown in LA. It's still called Koreatown, although it has the highest population of people from Oaxaca, who actually have to pay taxes to their home village if they want to go and visit at any time over the summer. So we've been trailing all kinds of things like that, but not only, what people send away from the United States, but also what people leave and bring to the United States, and you could call that a form of cultural remittances. So this is, of course, my favorite since I'm from South Africa. The African market, we sell you food to make you feel good and at home. And this is 137th Street in the Bronx, where a lot of people from Ghana come shopping and send money back to very small farms in Ghana to raise goats, and they actually raise goats in the Bronx too. So that's the sort of the political scope of the lab, is that you can start anywhere on the circle. You can start with people who leave data trails. That data is designed, it has an effect on policy and the built environment, or you can start with data which is designed for policy reasons and has an effect on the built environment and on people, and various ways of thinking about that. So the current project, and the one that I'm working on with Jen right now, really is thinking of the future of, right? So we're using very different kinds of data that I'm familiar with. It's brand new work for the lab, it's brand new work for me. We're thinking about the future of, and that's the mandate of the project. It's called the Advanced Data Visualization Project. I know that's a big title for a group at Eyeo. But that's the name of the project, and it's the future of the university, the library, of visualization, of journalism, of architecture, of science, of neuroscience, computer science. We're not sure we're doing very well at predicting the future, but we're far away, very far along the way of each project.
So we're going to start talking about each one of the new projects we're working on. The first one is, we're working with Thomson Reuters specifically on this one, with data that they have on international shipping. And specifically, we've been looking at energy data because that tends to be what they're interested in. What's interesting about working with shipping data, so it's really, really common to see these flight pattern data visualizations, right? Like this is a common thing that you see all the time. And you don't see shipping as much. Shipping is largely unregulated. And so the Thomson Reuters, like a big part of what they've done is to pull together all these different data sets. And so what we end up with isn't we don't ever have the completeness. We just sort of have what they can get a hold of. So it's very different from other forms of travel. They told us a statistic that I think 30% of what's written on the documents of where ships are going is just totally wrong. So the way that you have to sort of tell where a ship is going, the way to do it is they have GPS signals that go off, but they don't have to have those on all the time. They just, near certain countries, like depending on the country, they have to turn them on, and then they can turn them off when they're in the middle of the ocean. And so basically,
especially when they're in international waters, the rules start changing, and sometimes even ship names change in the middle of a trip.
So we've been trying to find these sort of stories
on the same ship.
We've been trying to find stories on individual ships because they have the same numbers, but the names change over time, and it's just complicated. So what Thomson Reuters is interested in is to do predictive analytics, basically to see when a ship is leaving port based on, who owns that ship and what sort of trajectory it's starting with, where it will end up, and to basically work with energy futures, right? To make a best guess where the ship will deliver. It's interesting, just something that we noticed like right when we were working on this project is that the map projection, the Mercator map projection that we always see was created for ships, for shipping. A quote from it is, "This is the new and augmented description of Earth corrected for the use of sailors." So just super simply, some of the data that we have, this is the GPS signals from 2011 that Thomson Reuters was able to give us. So it's like 11 million points, ship locations. And I like it because it shows a bunch of different things about data. So it shows things that are real in the world. You can see these like detailed paths from Australia to Asia. And then it also shows the sort of messiness in the data. You have these vertical lines that can't possibly be right. And it also shows the traces of data collection and storage, so the human decisions made about data. You can see these sort of lines and kind of very distinct geometric patterns. And so when we first made this, we looked at it and thought, oh, there's something really interesting happening there. And then Thomson Reuters said, no, we just decided we're not interested in that data, so we don't save it. So like in one image, you can see, are we telling a story about the world, or are we telling a story about the way that humans have been engaged with that data? Oh, I was just going back to the quote that I had, that the paths now are relatively the same. We have all this GPS and data collection and everything, but somehow the paths end up being the same. And so it's just, this is like the future has an ancient heart. So the position, we have like each of these ships, and sort of our velocity, like which direction we're trying to take this particular. So Thomson Reuters wants predictive analytics. And what we're interested in is this idea of big data and ethnography, which I personally got interested in when my friend Heather Ford, who's a researcher at Oxford, and I ended up having drinks in the town I was living in like a year and a half ago, and she's an ethnographer, and I was working with data. And we're interested in that idea of scale. A lot of people are interested in this now because it seems like with the tools that we have, we should be able to tell a story from the large, like global shipping scale all the way down to a particular ship, right? And we should be able to say, have that be a coherent story. And so Heather's been working on this, and Kate Crawford has had some nice articles about it lately. And there's a lot of people right now saying we should put together big data and ethnography. Ethnography gives context to big data results, and big data might lead to interesting ideas of who to go talk to and do ethnography with. But I haven't really seen anybody doing visualization or talking about, once we have big data and ethnography put together, how do we communicate that? So basically the idea, so the direction we want to go with this is how do we connect these global patterns over time to very local things. These are the 9 biggest ports in the US in terms of energy coming into the port. And our plan for this is actually to go and do interviews with people who are working at the ports and put those stories together with